Hello, everyone. This is oh, I'm glad it's gone. That would have been alarming, at least for all of you, for the next 20 minutes. I don't have to stare at my own sort of weird Blade Runner face. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I really, really enjoyed the last few sessions, and this theatre is absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to talk today about culture, which is something we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about internally, but isn't something we've spoken a huge amount about externally. We talk a lot about the company's mission, which is a sort of the what and the why of Monzo, but I think the culture and really values is the how, the sort of how do we operate on a day-to-day basis, how do we make decisions. And I think the danger is culture is this sort of waffly thing that you could spend 15 or 20 minutes talking about and not really say anything. And I am cautious of doing the same, so I'll endeavour not to do that. But instead, for me, culture is best described as sort of the way things are done around here. Sort of the norms, the rules that are sometimes written, sometimes unwritten. How do we make decisions? What behaviours do we reward? Which do we discourage or even punish? And then what does that create? That system that we build, what is the output of that system? Is that a product that people love? Is it one that's vastly profitable? And what impact does it have on the rest of the world? And I want to start there first. I think it's a really fundamental question of why do companies exist? Genuinely, literally, what are they there for? I think 20 years ago, this idea of maximizing shareholder value was sort of a convenient fiction people used to make a bunch of bad decisions, honestly. And recently, you've seen the CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the US get together and say, no, it's not maximizing shareholder value, it's a combination of things. We have to be profitable and sustainable, but we also need to think about our impact on society and the environment. Because if we don't do that, we're going to make a bunch of profit and screw everything else up. And I think we have seen that in the internet companies, particularly that came out of the early 2000s. You look at their sort of official or sometimes unofficial slogans, don't be evil. It's not a positive statement of intent, is it? It's sort of, rule out the bad stuff, but, if we're that's an amoral statement. That's not a positive statement. And so I think companies need to exist to leave the world slightly better than they found it, genuinely. I think some of the work that B Corps are doing in that movement, I honestly cannot understand why every company is not a B Corp, genuinely. So I think at the very, very heart of it, you've got to ask why do we even exist? What are we here for? I asked one of the investors of a company who remained nameless, like, what is your mission? What are you here for? And genuinely, on a stage like this, he said it's to get loads of customers and sell to a bank. That was their mission, genuinely, which I found alarming. And so the Monzo mission, which we've actually written down as a value in that, is to make money work for everyone. So I think banks have had a problem that they exist to make profit out of existing financial products, basically. And you're optimizing a set of credit cards and mortgages to generate profit, and customers are an inconvenient sort of secondary concern. And so I think if you start from a customer and say, actually, we exist to remove anxiety, to make customers feel more in control, have visibility of their money, and to make that money genuinely work for them, not work for someone else. So we're trying to build Monzo to be this hub, this platform, which gives you visibility of all of your money, wherever it sits, does the administration, does the calendar reminders and the spreadsheets, to get rid of that honestly overwhelming anxiety that most normal people feel about their money, and to do that for everyone. To do that for not just rich millennials in Shoreditch, although it did start that way, but genuinely for everyone. For people who are new to the country, who come sometimes without passports, for people who've just got out of prison, for people who are homeless. And I think that's just a start. That's just the UK. To make money work for everyone around the world, I think, is our mission. I know it's our mission. The front page of our first few investment decks, which I tried to get Matthias to put money into, said, Monzo is building a powerful financial control center for 1 billion people around the world. We took that out, because then we realized there were actually 7 billion people around the world, and we weren't being ambitious enough. So that was the mission statement. I've talked about mission, I think, because it's important before we move on to values and culture. So values and culture is a sort of the how. The mission is sort of what we're doing and the kind of why behind it all, but the how is the sort of values and the culture. It was really, really interesting because we started Monzo and we talked about it a lot, but we never wrote it down. We're such a small company, at least originally 4 or 5 years ago. We all sat round a table and we sort of instinctually knew how. And those were things that you may have heard of, things like transparency, really involving the community, being community-centric in pretty much all of our decisions. And I can give you a few examples. 3 rounds of crowdfunding, changing our name with a 14,000-person customer suggestions, going out to allow our customers to vote on how we charge for products. All those things are really community-driven. But I think even more than transparency and community sort of centricity, it's about empathy, basically. That boils down to empathy, sort of care for other human beings. I think that is really, really fundamental. But what we found as we grew is this culture, first of all, we had to work to preserve it. It wasn't just, rather to communicate it to each new joiner. It wasn't just we somehow weirdly thought it was going to be a process of osmosis. You know, they come in the door and suddenly absorb all of this sort of history that we all had lived magically. And that, surprise, surprise, did not happen. So the first question is sort of what routines do we put in place to preserve the best of our culture? But actually more interestingly for me is how do we evolve our culture? Which bits do we really like? And what are the unintended consequences of some of those things that don't scale, that don't work? We're now 1,400 people. We have 3 million customers around the UK. And we're in the press pretty much every day. What parts of our culture worked when we were 15 people in a startup office servicing hips in Shoreditch that don't work now? We're a mainstream national brand. And it's sort of interesting to explore some of those. So I've written a list, which I'd love to share with you. So the interesting first thing is I stood on stages like this at the very start and really banged on about banks and how they were really product-centric and everything revolved around the mortgage and they just cared about profits. And an unintended consequence of that was parts of our company, possibly the whole company, internalized the message that profit is evil. It was like, no, 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 that's not what I meant. I meant, let's be clear about this. But genuinely, people thought that whenever we were charging for anything, that must be fundamentally wrong. And we sort of work through this and go, okay, but how do we pay your salaries? And they're, well, that's what investment's for, right? And you're like, sure, in the short term, I guess, but what do you think happens eventually? I'm like, well, we've go and raise some more investment. Genuinely, this is a conversation I've had probably a dozen times with people who don't understand, or rather thought that revenue and profit was in tension with doing the right thing for customers, which is absolutely not true. It can be, but I think the best businesses find something that's really positive for society and the environment and individual customers and generates a really healthy, sustainable profit. And to be clear, we're not yet profitable, so we've still not cracked that one. But that was part of the culture we really fought to transform and to evolve, that we needed to find ways of making revenue that was fair and transparent, was a value exchange. I mean, we got people from don't charge to anything for, okay, we can accept that we can charge at cost for some things. And like, yeah, but who pays your salaries? Come on. So for example, ATM fees is an area where we actually just charge at cost. We don't make any money on foreign ATM fees for a pricing model that breaks even. But there is no extra margin for anything else on that. So that's a really interesting kind of cultural shift that we've had to go through over the last couple of years. The second thing is really interesting, again, interesting to me, and I'll share it with you, and you can make up your own minds, which is the really iterative, open community development, sort of almost move fast and break things culture, I guess. And when we're very, very small, we had a prepaid card, we launched features early that weren't complete, and we said to our customers, come and help us test them. Come and see what you think, iterate with us. If you spot a bug, we'll fix it. And it was really great because they were sort of bought into that. And we maintained that for a fair amount of time by having a small group called Monzo Labs where you could opt into this stuff. And you'd see early product releases and you'd comment and feature and blah, 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 blah. And that worked quite well. 2 things broke. One, this move fast and break things was never a Monzo motto. It was a Facebook motto, and even they got rid of it. So one is, how do you do that in a regulated environment? We're a regulated bank. We speak to our our regulators literally multiple times every day. And so there's that sort of burden of governance and compliance, which is absolutely right because we're processing £50 billion of payments a year. And if we get it wrong, people have their lives ruined. But how do we balance that with sort of a fast iterative approach with a heavily regulated environment? The second challenge there was when we were starting out, literally no one cared what we did, except Steve O'Hare from TechCrunch. He got very excited. Eileen, one of our investors, tweeted an early prototype, and Steve wrote literally an article off the back of the tweet, which was great. But now we do that, and national newspapers write articles about it. And so in the last year, we've had a really tough time iterating on products where we've done what we've always done, which is launch something early, work with our community to iterate, but a national newspaper gets hold of the prototype and is like, is this new Monzo product any good? Subtext, no it isn't. It's like, come on, it's the first version, this is what we've always done, iterate with us. And now being a national brand, you can't do that in the same way. And so we've had to figure that one out. And in terms of the first question on sort of regulation and compliance, what I've always talked about, much more so recently, is moving fast in control. And the analogy I use is, I was just on the simulator outside. If you know how to go, it's amazing. The McLaren F1 simulator. I talk about Formula One. So you can move fast. Formula One versus drag racing, and sort of bear with me for a second. So the kind of analogy goes, you can build a car or a go-kart effectively that goes really, really fast in a drag race. You get basically a go-kart and strap a rocket to the back of it, pump it full of rocket fuel and light the fuse, and you go really, really quick until you hit a bend. And then you go off the track and it explodes and people die. And that is not a good model for running a company because there's always going to be a bend. And so a much better model for me is Formula One, where these cars are incredible precision instruments. And they go really, really, really quick, but they've got huge brakes. They've got really grippy tires. They've got telemetry that measures everything that's going on. And when you need to make a change, you come into a pit stop with a team of 40 incredibly highly trained professionals who will do it in 1.95 seconds. A pit stop, and I was at a Formula One event recently, and I got to sit above the pits watching this thing. It's unbelievable. The amount of precision engineering and drilling and expertise that goes into that to get the car changed in 1.95 seconds and out again, going at whatever, 200 miles an hour is just phenomenal. And so moving fast, but making sure you are in control. What does that mean? Making sure you're measuring all of the right things, making sure before you send your car out, you've thought about all of the things that can go wrong and what your plans and mitigations are. That's something you don't honestly have to do when you're a few thousand customers and a few dozen employees. But now we do. And that's an interesting tension and sort of evolution. I'll say two final things, and I will open up for 5 minutes of questions, if that is okay. Yes, I think it's okay. So, final two things on sort of maintaining your culture, evolving your culture. Empathy can care for a sort of fellow human being can sometimes be ruinous. What I mean by that is if you're not having the hard conversations, especially internally with employees, about what performance do we expect from everyone here, you end up in a situation where you don't address performance issues. Especially when you're growing really, really quickly, it's really easy to say, well, as a new manager who hadn't managed many people before, I could go in a really hard conversation, the person might be very awkward, they might cry, I might get, I don't know what's going to happen, or I could just hire another person. It's like, which one should I do? I'll hire another person. And especially if you're very fast growing, you don't have a lot of very, very experienced managers, you get sometimes this problem of ruinous empathy. And so trying to foster a culture where you really, really care about people, but knowing that the best thing for the person and the company actually might be that they work somewhere else. No one likes doing a crap job, really. They come to work every day and know they're not pulling their weight. That's not fun for anyone. But having that conversation saying, look, here are the things we want to improve and we'll work with you. 3 months later, it hasn't worked. Let's find you somewhere you're going to be really, really happy. And then actually following through and emailing a bunch of VCs or startups or other companies saying, I've got this great person. They didn't work out here. I think they're amazing at these 3 things. Find them a company. I think that is kind of, the book Radical Candor kind of goes into a lot more detail on this. But really, really having the hard conversations, because ultimately, in the long term, it is better for people. even if it feels uncomfortable in the short term. That's something we've had to evolve over the last couple of years, and I think we're in a much, much better place for it. Finally, transparency. So one of our values is default transparency. We've had many, many people who've come from other companies that claim to be transparent. They come to Monzo and it's like, holy crap, it's on another level, which I think is amazing, because the kind of rationale here is twofold. One is we devolve decision-making to the people closest to the customer and the problem, and so to make the best decision, they need the most amount of information about the problem so they can make the decision with the best context. The second, honestly, is about trust externally. We don't have, this is now true, we do have millions of pounds to run national advertising campaigns. We did a very successful one over summer. A year ago, we did not have millions and millions of pounds. And so building trust when we didn't have kind of branches with columns outside, transparency is a way to do that, sort of the antidote to the financial crisis, honestly. That sometimes we do make mistakes, but it's not because we're evil. Look, here's our decision-making process, here's what we did, and it goes wrong, and sort of explaining that to people, I think, does build trust. So transparency is about decision-making internally and then trust externally. Final point, how we've evolved that. Transparency, unfortunately, in a company of 1,500 people, ends up being like drinking from a fire hose, because there's so much information going on that you really need to start filtering. So be really, really sensible about not hiding information, but saying this 1% is the stuff that you really, really need to pay attention to. There's a long tail of stuff that just doesn't matter, and helping people filter, especially if they're new to the company. This might sound very, very obvious. This was not obvious to us. It's now much better. So those are a few thoughts on how we have tried to not just maintain, but in some cases evolve our culture to accomplish the sort of goals and mission of the company that we're aiming for. Thank you very much. Do we have time for a couple of minutes?